to EAVCA for co-sponsoring this with us. This is obviously part 2 of the webinar series. The first part was focused on investors. I'm personally quite excited about this part because I think we have a robust panel here, and will be a discussion on all sorts, I hope. With that, given the time frame, I will share with you a brief presentation, but I think we should focus more on the conversation, which we will do shortly. So give me a second to share my screen. Ladies and gentlemen, I think what our focus today is really the implications of this pandemic for companies. We realize that different countries are going through this at different sort of speeds. Kenya is probably lagging behind other countries in Europe and the Middle East. And so some of this, what we're going to talk about is already stuff that I hope you're already thinking about, but some might be new. We'll be focusing on 2 key areas. One is just about how, what this new age of business planning is and requires. And second is, and very importantly, is how you manage working capital in this crisis, which we like to say is quite distinct from the 08 or 09 crisis, because we believe this is a genuine demand crisis, and its impact will be a lot more widespread. I think the first sort of question that we've got to address, and you know, I think a lot of companies, owners, management focus on sort of reacting to this pandemic in sort of immediately looking at costs, etc. But I think we believe that you've got to approach this slightly differently. We believe you've got to understand, just step back for a second and understand where you are on the liquidity scale. We believe that because of this crisis being such a demand-driven crisis, we believe that liquidity is going to be key for most companies for its survival and eventual growth out of this. And therefore, I think you've got to assess, firstly, are you, which end of the scale are you on? Do you have abundant or availability of liquidity, which you can draw either from your own reserves or because your balance sheet allows you to take on more leverage? You need to think about that. You need to think about what's your real cost of capital. And I think the dynamics for you, if you're on the left, or if you're on the cash end of this scale, it's really about how you invest through this cycle and how you take advantage, because there will be a lot of opportunity for businesses that have availability for liquidity. I think on the other extreme, which is if you are slightly leveraged or you believe are at the top end of the leverage and your balance sheet can't afford to take more and you don't have access to liquidity, I believe you've got to really focus on how you manage those liquidity risks. I think, unfortunately, I think as we talk to a lot of bankers and liquidity providers, we're finding that the immediate reaction has been very, very supportive from your funding partners. But we believe that that is also very short term. We believe that will last for 3 months to 6 months. And effectively, because no one really knows or no one really knew the true extent of this crisis, they were just giving some allowance and providing short-term moratoriums and plans. But I think as this crisis is growing in terms of length of time, the need to to look at other more structural solutions is very, very, very important. And what we are advising our clients now is to focus and not to wait for the end of those 3 months or the 6 months moratorium, and to start thinking about structural solutions today, and producing plans around them and understanding what that means. Let it sink in. And be proactive with your funding partners, and start having that engagement today. So when the time comes, also very, very ready. I suppose everyone is moving towards sort of maintaining that balance, and I think sort of a combination, if you're on the cash side or if you're on the debt side, I think ideally is really you need to think about sustainability. It's how you sustain yourself through this crisis and then how you grow at the end, whether it's finding structural solutions or whether it's finding opportunities to invest. So, again, sticking to the theme, it's not one size fits all. So what's this new age of business planning? We'll spend a few minutes on the next slide talking in a little more detail. But essentially, we sort of put them into 4 quadrants. And we think that you've got to look at economic assumptions that affect you. And a lot of companies that we find don't really sort of put that into their own business modeling. And I think this is a piece that even if you're building this internally, not only from an investor perspective, but actually from a company management perspective, these are areas that you need to start thinking about and sensitizing. We've seen this crisis have a significant, we've seen multiple crises actually. We've seen there's been a crisis, a shorter term crisis around oil price, the oil price shock, and that has affected a bunch of people, particularly oil exporting countries. We believe that this crisis is going to have a significant impact on the purse of a lot of the sovereigns. We see that in Kenya. We've seen the latest budget as well, and I think it's going to have a longer term impact on currency fluctuation, and there will be a significant devaluation over a period of time. And I think companies who source globally will have to start thinking about input pricing and how that adjusts to output pricing. So I think the macro assumptions are very, very important and shouldn't be short-lived. We believe that the second quadrant that we should look at is really around internal KPIs. I think people need to reevaluate what those KPIs are. Focus on, for example, margins are important, but then you focus on liquidity now is also important. Focus on finding new customer segments is also very, very important. So I think those adjustments need to be looked at. The third quadrant is that this is going to have a significant impact on the business environment. You're going to think about, working practices will change. How you treat your employees will change. Is there going to be a saving on rent? Can there be a saving on rent? And can we do that where we are today, or do we need to then invest in technology? How does that impact our business? Is there a tangible saving that we can do? So that a lot of operational modeling is important. And lastly, of course, is sensitivity, is really if we look at the volatility in the markets is significant. I think there are a number of things that will start to change, not only the crisis, there are election cycles, there are oil stocks, and how we've got to make sure that we've got a core that is resilient to that and then sensitized for all the others. Just talking that in a little more detail, and these are obviously indicative, is when you develop your business plans or you update your business plans, and sticking to the FX rate fluctuation, because that is a key theme we've carried from part 1 of this series, is people need to start thinking about hedging plans. You need to focus on looking for suppliers that have more sort of favorable currency fluctuations and are more aligned to your business. I think it's a bit of a structural shift. I think a lot of companies get very comfortable with their current supply base, but I think the focus now to look at alternative supplies, alternative products is extremely important. Of course, change in inventory and change of branding, etc., on supply side is key. When we look at sort of business and operations, and again sticking to the same theme about there's a significant change in employee requirements, training costs, transportation, fuel, working allowances will all have to change. You'll have to redesign possibly certain jurisdictions. There's now a law that you've got to redesign your office space. What does that impact on your rent? How can you optimize that? Is there a requirement to invest in technology? If so, how do you evaluate that? So these are very, very important items that, previously have been dismissed by some managers, and I think it's now coming to the fore. I think when we look at financial data review, we're of the view that you've got to go one step forward. You've got to then look at your customer base, who are vulnerable to the shocks. How do we ensure that we manage liquidity risks, by looking at your end customer segment? I think it's very, very important to now look at that level of detail, and it's everything now is moving towards sort of very sort of minute data-driven decision making, which is very important. Again, looking at receivables, what is realistic? How can we support our customers to make sure that their business survives so we can recover our receivables? Those are strategies that we need to think about, and then we need to put those into our business plans. Moving to, and then obviously sensitizing. Clearly, the key has to be optimizing balance sheets and evaluating our financing options, but also, thinking about how do we improve working capital? How do we cut excess levels of inventory, debtors? I mean, this is a real good opportunity to really look deep internally and understand how we can do that and then sensitize that. We've been advising a fairly large business that has got a big retail segment to it, and the question really is around, who are in a significant Kpis spending spree, is do you stop that Kpis, and how much of that Kpis is necessary for the resurgence? So I think the conventional wisdom would be, no, you just stop whatever you're doing, but in reality you've got to have one eye on the recovery. So I think that level of around those key boxes is essential. Rushing, you've got limited time, but we'll take some time for Q&A. When we come to managing working capital in a demand crisis, I think this is essential. I think there needs to be a lot of discipline around how you manage this. I think we've identified this circle, and we look at these key areas. There might be more, but essentially, I think you've got to look at it in a methodical fashion, thinking about, you'll have restricted access to lending markets. Do you need to, companies will need to look at their existing loan agreements, need to understand covenants, need to understand, can they draw more if this moratorium doesn't extend between, more than the period that has been granted. What are the options? Who are the alternatives? Are there alternative access to liquidity? And if so, where is that? How expensive is it? So I think that kind of planning and that kind of thinking is very, very important. I think coming back to the key, which I must underline, is you've got to be proactive internally, and you've got to be proactive with your lenders. Fixed costs, again, talking about stopping the cash bleed today. We think about cost cutting, but we had a very interesting dilemma, is that do you send people, for example, on unpaid leave, or do you make people redundant? And you then enter a dilemma where you think about redundancies, and you think about, well, actually that's a cash cost, and very perversely you end up putting cash in the hands of presumably your lower performing staff. Whereas if you send people to unpaid leave, the debate is you will come back, and once you come back, you can retrain these people. So I think debates like that are very, very, very important. When you look at Kpis, I think you've got to understand Kpis not only that will hit you post crisis, but you've got to look at Kpis now. You've got to think about investment in technology. We speak to a bunch of companies that are spending this time now really investing in technology solutions, because they believe that once they pass this pandemic, that is what will help them. So it's not that you stop your spending completely. You've got to evaluate each project very, very, very carefully. Interesting strategies around inventories and finding anything in the balance sheet that you think you can liquidate to release some cash. We've seen a whole bunch of very, very innovative solutions around liquidating inventories, and of course, and then looking at how processes can be re-engineered internally so that you can reduce inventory times. I think cash flow preparation is key. We've got to focus on cash flow with military style discipline and look at that regularly, look at that daily. You've got to think about areas where you can collect cash, areas where you can release working capital from. And I think what's important is that to note that this is it's a moving target, right? So this needs constant reevaluation, and no decision is wrong. Even if you change your decision next week, doesn't mean it's wrong, but you just to keep reevaluating based on data that you've received. I think a lot of guys are structurally looking to shift supply chain, and I think it's key for, we talked about foreign exchange. I think that is important, but also efficiency in process, time to get to you, and so there's more sort of a structural shift within the operations. What we feel and what we like to share is that what we've seen working very well is that you've got to almost create sort of a formal structure internally. You've got to think about how first, looking at the agility of your organization, how you're able to respond to this crisis, and you've got to develop that core business model that we've just talked about, and of course have a period of constant reevaluation. And I think you've got to split that into two. I think a lot of people focus on reacting to the crisis, which I think is very important, and I think people get so the bandwidth gets taken up completely around how do we cut costs. But I think you've got to then also have an eye on setting a new baseline and what does it look post-crisis, because I think that is very, very important, and people are failing to realize that as you come to the end of this crisis, you've got to think about what sort of and this is a very overused terminology, so apologies, but what this new normal looks like and how you're going to maintain your competitive advantage. You almost create a project steering committee and a transformation team, and you meet, for some clients, we're meeting twice a week to revisit these scenarios and have these conversations. And you focus on different areas. We have one that focuses on marketing, one on receivables, one on inventory management. So you allow the people to be motivated within to find those very, very active solutions. So we found this sort of structure works extremely well with clients that we've seen across the region. I think just sort of dovetailing to what we're saying is you almost start building the scenario planning, right? And I think this is important because we recognize that you have limited bandwidth, right? So you've got people who are focused on particular areas, and you don't want to overburden them, A, with the stress, but B, also with thinking about sort of various things. So we think that you sort of have the first scenarios, okay, well, how are we going to reduce our expenditure, which includes, tightening our workforce. Okay, what are we going to do? Are we going to send people on unpaid leave? Are we making redundancies? Or how do we utilize the unutilized sort of workforce? Do you retrain? You've got to think about that. That forms a very big pillar of scenario 2. Scenario 3 is all around receivables. How do we then look at sort of supporting our vendors, our partners, to make sure that there will be a resurgence when this thing opens up, but also through the crisis, how do we support them so we make sure that we have this relationship and frankly they survive so that we can continue to do business together. And then of course the fourth stage is all around the offerings amongst amid the pandemic, right? So what can you offer to focus on your top line. So it's not only a middle line and bottom line conversation. You've got to really focus on your top line. You've got to think about, products that you can do today realistically at no added cost, but also how you're going to position yourself coming out of this crisis. So I think, in terms of putting a structure together, it's important to have the discipline and to put sort of the method behind it. And obviously, as the duration of the pandemic increases, you start to put different things into place. And I think this can only be done if it's methodical and a lot of detail to decision making and constant review. There are, of course, select credentials of ours, but I will save you from this marketing pitch. But should you want a conversation around any of these, reach out to myself or any member of my team. I think I wanted to, with that, essentially bring us back to the panel. I'm a few minutes over, but I think it's important to have this conversation and have some Q&A. So with that, I'm very excited about our panel. We've got a very exciting collection of people today from various parts, various industry sets, but also various segments within the business chain. So in no particular order, I'm very excited to introduce Valentin Wambui, who is a certified brewmaster and is responsible for a lot of the production at East African breweries. I believe that there's definitely an applause if you read about Valentin on the media. She was described, and I think unfairly, but that she was described as a woman doing a man's job. But I think she's more than that. So there's Valentin Wambui. Welcome. We have Paul Smith, who is the CEO of Java. If you read Paul's credentials, he has exceptional experience over many years and many geographies, running businesses and consulting on F&B opportunities across the world. So welcome, Paul. We'll be very excited to hear your perspectives on this at Java. We have Simon Masharia, who is the CFO of QuickMart. Simon is in a very interesting spot because retail is seeing a resurgence, and he's the senior management of a business that is actually in the midst of a growth spurt at the moment. Congratulations, Simon, on your new store opening, and I'm reading that there's more openings coming up. So I think there's a very interesting collection of people here. I think so just kicking that right off, I think, Valentin, it's interesting to get your perspective because, given that you're a manufacturer, you are, you've got teams that you're working for you, you have a tremendous amount of employees. I mean, we'd be very keen to just understand for you in terms of this crisis, just I presume on a demand side, there is a sort of a base level of demand for beer that you can't really go under. In fact, critics argue that actually the demand goes up during crisis, people drink more. But from a production perspective, just talk us through the disruption around your supply chain. I think it'd be very interesting for us to understand that. And most importantly also is around safety for workers during the crisis, but also after that. I mean, what are your thoughts and how are you planning for that?
Okay, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be here today. COVID hit us in the second half of our financial year. We use the financial year to do taxes. So once this became a reality, okay, before the COVID hit us, we had really performed well in half one, and we expected to do equally well in half two, but this was not the case. So immediately, we were hit with the COVID-19 reality. We revised our AOP. That's what we did first. And I think you saw in the media that we we did put out our cautionary statement on the profits earlier on in April, yeah, which was very important for us to ensure that we communicate to our investors on our latest estimate. Yeah, and being that our business is mainly on-trade, we walk into a bar, drink, go home. Senator Keg, our value beer, is completely on-trade. And with the closure of the bars and other entertainment spots, as well as ban on social gatherings and other leisure activities, our sales were significantly impacted. So in terms of the baseline of demand, we did see a dip in our sales, and we had to react to ensure we cushion our business to ensure that we're able to thrive even in this time. So the first thing we did, our crisis management team sprang into action. We developed COVID-19 scenarios, carried out risk assessments with countermeasures, key decision-making around and ensuring relevant communication to all stakeholders, employees, investors, customers, and partners. As I earlier said, we did revise our AOP, and as expected by the Capital Markets Authority, we did give out our full year latest estimate in around the month of April. For KBL, safety and the well-being of our employees remains our topmost concern. So to this effect, we did a lot to ensure business continuity, carrying out risk assessments, developing procedures for safety, specifically with regard to COVID-19. Any hotspots were taken into consideration. As you're aware, COVID-19 came with its own safety requirements, which were new to all of us. So these procedures include temperature checks upon entry on site, hand washing stations, dispensers every few meters, procedures for social distancing, meetings moved to Zoom. Business critical face-to-face meetings were highly regulated with set occupancy level for the meeting rooms, ensuring that the 2-meter social distance was adhered to. We did provide personal protective equipment, sanitizers, masks. Water is now a PPE, and soap as well. Procedures on emergency response, what to do in case someone develops symptoms. We have guidelines on vulnerable employees. We have our call tree, or what we call our crisis phone tree communication procedures, asking if all team members are okay, and every tier reporting to the tier above it. Emphasizing that team members stay home if not feeling well. Safe ways of work where social distancing is not possible, as well as provision of approved face masks for jobs where the social distancing may not be possible. We also have procedures on disposal of used masks. Common areas such as canteens and washrooms, procedures around deep clean and sanitization of those areas. We have provision of emergency leave days to allow for stay at home, as well as online trainings and free counseling services for mental health support. Employees are enabled to work from home. We also have the COVID-19 response team and County Ministry of Health contact numbers easily accessible on site in case of emergency. So
Valen, sorry. I mean, that's amazing. So but what, in terms of the crisis, I mean, this is stuff that you've got to do. And the question is now, now I presume, I don't know if your production levels have declined during COVID. And then you've got, so you can afford to have fewer people, you can afford to do speed, but sort of going back to normal now, how do you see, I mean, is this going to be part of your sort of DNA around sort of production, or will it now change after the crisis?
Okay, we've divided our, let's say, timelines in 3 parts. We have the now, which is with the pandemic and with the restrictions, and we have the next with the pandemic but with eased restrictions, and then we have the beyond, which is the new normal, when the new normal becomes normal. So for the now, these are the restrictions as of now, as we still await for the global either the vaccine to be found. But these are the this is the new normal for the now and the next. Yeah, the next with the restrictions. Yeah, and apart from that, because we have to make sure that our operations are able to we're able to ensure that our employees are able to feel safe every time they come to site. So these guidelines are, let's say, becoming a way of work for us for now.
And just sort of very quickly then, Valentin, just in terms of supply chain, is your supply chain, presumably you source a lot locally in terms of sort of basic raw materials, but there must be some that is imported. So is your supply chain either at home or abroad disrupted by this, and how are you dealing with that?
Luckily for us, 80% of our raw materials are sourced locally. We do have the 20% which is sourced externally, and through our partnerships, and also we were lucky enough that we had some stock also at the port. We have been able to maintain our operations, our normal operations, but we do have contingent plans to ensure that we're able to get our supplies, even if it means within the region. So we're also looking within the region, some that maybe we could get a bit extra, maybe across the sea.
Okay, thank you. Paul, just turning to you a little bit. I mean, I think you've got, I mean, it's interesting because conceptually one would have thought that the F&B segment has sort of been hit the hardest. Entertainment, you've got, I presume your sort of in-store demand is fallen, but then again, it's coffee, and arguably coffee is something that people look after. So I look out for, and I just don't know. It'd be interesting to hear from you. I mean, how much have you been impacted from this real demand crisis, and how does that then affect you? I mean, it's well documented that Java has got sort of very robust growth plans and is looking for a number of store openings. So how does that how do you now deviate from that, and how do you sort of change your plans as a result of this?
Well, when the first sort of case of COVID-19 was announced, which I'll never forget, was Friday the 13th of March. Within 7 days, our sales dropped down to 15% of normal. So we had an 85% drop, clean straight out. So clearly that was an interesting impact. And just briefly talking through, things have then been relaxed. We've had this change in the sort of social distancing, etc. And our sales have come back a little bit, but until the distancing is released, we're only operating on those stores that were open now at 30% of covers or seats, and there's no way you can continue making money on that. But the way we reacted to this, believe it or not, we had our first meeting about COVID-19 on the 7th of January. We saw what was going on in China. There is a situation. I lived in China for 5 years, so a pretty good idea about what gets covered up, what happens, what doesn't over there. And this is what we call the weak signal. We had a very complicated day where we sat down and said, right, if we scenario plan that we had to close completely, if our sales drop by 30%, if they drop by 50%, what would we have to do? And the single biggest thing for me, and this might sound a bit radical to everyone, but there is no such thing as normal. If you read the definition normal, which is conforming to a standard, well, tell me where there's a standard. Okay, there's a food standard, but no longer is there a standard in this world. It moves every day. Things are changing, technology are moving it. Things that are usual, tell me what's usual. What's typical? Tell me what's typical and expected. Well, nobody saw this coming, and yet we've had a number of viruses floating around the world. So there is no such thing as normal. The minute you think normal, you are in a mindset that means you're complacent. So the biggest single shift we did was to start changing people's mindset to that. Also crisis. We are in a crisis, I accept that. But if you think you're in a crisis, the mindset is that you will return to something that existed before. Well, you're not going to. So, the way we're working now is on ability and agility to actually understand and move quickly. We move to, and we've always done this in Java, a situation of what we call planning the present from the future. So we worked out where we wanted to be as a result of this thing hitting us, how it would change our business, what it would shift, how we'd move up the retail side. We have a huge 4,000 square meter production facility, what we could use that for differently, how the business would shape. So to come to your question, yeah, we had to cut everything down because our biggest thing is that we're going to keep 2,500 people employed as best we can do, and so far we are doing that. We are going to work on all the things that you talked about, and we cut everything back in terms of what we're doing, but it clearly hasn't taken away our strategies for the future. Everything is just on hold. The banking we've sorted out. Interesting, just for everyone, the banks took 3 months before they started approaching their landlords for their own sites, so they're a bit slow on doing that as well. We also produced groups of people, like we have a landlords committee, we have a suppliers committee that we meet regularly on, talking about the issues that we're facing and then getting their feedback. So we really worked on the whole partnership scenarios of what was going on. So yeah, it's affected our stores. We were going to open between March and June some 11 stores. That's on hold. We had a team in Nigeria. That's clearly on hold. There's a deal going on in Ethiopia. That's on hold. But it's only on hold.
Right.
You know, we think Java's big enough. We were very undergeared, so we were fine on that side of it. We had a healthy balance sheet. We were fine on that side. And I have a extremely skilled and very, very passionate group of people that work for me. So in a way you could call that a bit of luck, but the biggest thing for me was change of mindset. You've got to start now thinking really differently about this. It isn't going to go back to normal. There is no new normal.
Yeah, I absolutely right. And it's, you know, I reluctantly use that phrase because I actually hate that phrase, to be honest. But what's interesting is you know, Paul, you talk about sort of a drop from what 85% in turnover, you know, overnight, right? I mean, even if you're prepared, how do you prepare for that, right? You just don't know, right? And it sounds like, just given you're very meticulous in planning and thinking about where you're going ahead. But just tell us, I mean, ultimately, and excuse me, I just don't know the mix of business between sort of coffees, and I presume there's not a lot of big takeaway coffee culture, so it's a lot of in-store eating, in-store dining, in-store. But presumably there is no new normal. So are you investing now in thinking about sort of alternatives to, you know, to this in-store concept? Is it, you know, I don't know what they could be. I'm sure there's a whole range of those.
No, I know where you're going with this question. So yeah, so predominantly most of our sales are due to sit-in sales in stores, or they have been. But we started to move a couple of years ago, or 3 years ago, and I joined, about taking the reliance off Java. It was too much of a core amount for us. So we've invested in B2B, we've invested in retail operations, we've invested in international coffee sales, etc. And all that was going on anyway. So what we're doing now is that is all being dialed up. That needs to be a lot more of a comprehensive sort of area we're in. We have a big food commissary. We were changing that to an even bigger one. That's on hold at the moment, and rightly so. But we have plans now to move into catering operations, to move into food production for retail. So we've got a lot of demand from retail now to make recipe dishes, frozen and cold chain dishes that people can take home, heat up, and move away. So that's happening. In terms of store designs, the store designs are moving more to a takeaway point, because clearly that's growing as well. And I think people will be reticent to move into. If you look at what's happened in China, even though they've been relatively opened up in a number of areas, they're still only on about 65 to 70% of people coming back in. People don't want to be in places anymore. Yeah. So we now have to find a way of handling that, and that's what we're moving towards, to open up those other avenues in the business, designing our stores so that they're different, handling a place. So for example, if you look at Java, it's very famous for its booths. If you have a booth there and one person sits in it, you've lost 3 covers. So if we can get the flexibility of seating to work better without losing the DNA, that's what we're also doing. But to be fair, we'd started a lot of that also, because there was an absolute over-reliance on Java as a core, really. So that's the sort of directions that we're taking and moving towards. And there's a lot of work. We've used these last 3 months to, you know, one of the things that we're doing is, if you look at the structure, and we launched a new structure 2 weeks ago on what the business will look like in the future. Now we're saying, if you're planning your present for the future, who's going to survive that, not being made redundant, but who do we now need to reskill? And I think people in Africa look a lot on their experience. You now need to look at your skills and how they can be applied to different areas rather than just what your experience has been. And we're looking at retraining, we're looking at reskilling and moving people into different areas and into different jobs that they would never be. A great example of that, we have a guy who's a PhD, runs on engineering and R&M, the sort of repairs and maintenance area. But his skill is mechanistic and process thinking. So he's now in the commissary, working all the production side up for commissary and handling that in a different way. The other big thing that we challenge is it takes 13 weeks to grow vegetables. People stop planting them because there was no market for them. That's going to take a time to get up. 2 months ago, there was nearly 3,000 piglets slaughtered at birth because there was no market for the food product. It takes 6 months to grow these sorts of things. So it's going to take a long time for that supply chain to catch itself up. And those are other things that we're having to think about, is how we manage that. How do we shift recipes so that we're more agile on what's available? So some of the traditional things may disappear for a while until all those come back up. All that thinking has to be done by a shift in mindset, and that's what we do.
And Paul, I mean, it sounds like, I mean, this level of engagement is important, right? And we're big on engaging both at the front end, but also at the back end, right? Because when you come back to sort of increase sales, etc., your supply chain needs to catch up, right? But are you doing this alone, Paul, or is there a, you know, what kind of support are you getting from, I suppose, government bodies or private sector bodies like Kpis? I mean, is it a structured approach, or is it sort of every man for himself?
No, we're doing it pretty much on our own, because I mean, I had to face a similar situation. It wasn't a pandemic, but when I worked in Kuwait, a war broke out in Iraq and we had to close everything down overnight. So we knew what the impact was going to be. And also, you know, it's something I think is missing in business as well now. It's what I call consequential thinking. You know, if you're going to do X, what's the consequence of that and where's it going to go? So this is sort of real strategic thinking we put in. To be honest with you, the government have worked with us a lot on getting the parameters in for social distancing in restaurants. We work very closely with the actually health ministers. We influence, I sit on the board of the British Chamber, so we influence that as well. But you know, a lot of this we've sort of done and developed based on experience, skill base, and the talents I've got in the business, really. This is where we've gone, you know. And those early meetings that we had, okay, if your sales dropped to nothing, okay, now let's do some consequential thinking on that. What have you got to do? How do you react to that? Think it through. So when it actually hit us, by the Monday of the Friday the 13th, by that 16th, we were already in contact with landlords. We'd sent letters out on what we want to do and how we want to do it. And you know, what I found in these circumstances is true, solid leadership. This is the direction we want to take. And actually, it took time for the landlords to work out what was going on, because they didn't believe it was going to hit them. Well, it did. And now I can honestly say to you that 95% of our landlords are totally on board with us. And the 2 or 3 that have caused us really fundamental issues, we're closing the stores down, because I'm not prepared to work with people like that anymore. How you behave and how you act in this environment now is how you're going to be treated in the future. And that's where we're going. We work with honesty and integrity, and I'm just not putting up with it anymore.
Yeah, and it is interesting, and you know, come back to EAVL before we had Simon in. I mean, it's interesting, Valentin, I was reading this morning that you're spending 500 million on engaging with your bars and restaurants just to make sure that, you know, they're prepared for the opening. And I think that's the exact partnerships that I think we'll see the whole ecosystem sort of get through this together.
Yes. So yeah, we carried out a global survey of bar owners just to identify what they need to reopen after lockdown. And their top needs, of course, were hygiene measures, digital support, and practical equipment to transform how their outlets will work in the future, or what we previously called the new normal. Yeah. So the program will provide targeted support to help pay for the physical equipment needed for outlets to reopen, funding for hygiene equipment, sanitizers, medical grade sanitizers, and a range of personal protective equipment, as well as training to help us emerge stronger. Yeah,
Was
so
great.
that is $5 million. Yeah.
Wow. But there's some Q&A around, people very interested in the types of beer that you're selling now and people are drinking, but we'll reserve those questions for later. Simon.
Sorry, there's a very good point in there that if you look at, you were going to have to clean stores more often, okay?
Yeah.
So let's find a new way of doing it. We're now working with an engineering company that's producing a misting system that sanitizes a store literally in 5 minutes.
Wow.
Okay, so again, plan your present from the future. You can't afford to clean as much as we're going to have to find a different way of doing it.
Yeah.
You've got to be out of the box here.
No, absolutely right. But I think the issue that we have is, and clearly for you, Paul, I mean, you've got experience in Asia and we've had sort of SARS, etc. And you're bringing that learning here. For many people, dealing with a pandemic is new, and the extent of this crisis, of course, is huge. So I think finding a way to collectively think, I think, is important, and finding these solutions. Otherwise, I mean, it's unfair. I mean, even through this, if Java survives on its own, it needs a sort of an ecosystem around it to support it, right? So I think that kind of engagement, maybe we have a separate conversation around how we set that up after this. That'll be good. Simon, just bringing you into this conversation, I mean, you are one of very few businesses that are now sort of in a growth spurt through this crisis. I think you opened a new store last week. Was it in Kilimani? You've got another one opening up in Embakasi coming up shortly. How, I mean, for you, the way you see this crisis, I suppose is very different. I mean, for you, it'll be, do you have enough inventory to survive the demand? And I presume the SKUs that you were used to selling have now changed completely, right? And it'd be just very interesting to see, to understand sort of how the mix has changed for you, how you're reacting to the crisis, because it's a complete contrast, I think, presumably, to say Paul's business. So your views, I think, would be very, very interesting.
Okay, thank you, Yudi, for having me. Our experience, actually, we initially foresaw a situation where there would be total closure. So in February, what we did was to stock up, because we foresaw a situation where customers would have some panic shopping, which happened in the month of March. So we stocked up the essentials, and so that happened in the month of March. But immediately thereafter, of course, we were also affected, like Paul was affected, because we run delis. We actually have small, I would call them quote-unquote restaurants that were also closed for seated guests. So we also lost that part of the business. But yes, you're right. What happened is that there are some customers, or rather we saw the change in the demand. Customers moved more into the essentials, and there were some categories that registered very minimal uptake. So our focus moved into the essentials category, and at the same time, we had to take measures to ensure that our stores, one, are sanitized regularly. We do deep cleaning, and that our customers also are checked when they're entering the stores in terms of temperature checks. We also observe social distancing. We had to say no to admission of children in the market, or rather in the stores. We also enhanced our EHS strategies in terms of taking care of our employees and customers at the same time. And what we've done is that through the crisis, more over and above looking at profit, we have geared up our social responsibility measures. For example, in terms of taking care of customers, our newest branch, Kilimani, which opened yesterday, we have ensured that it's very spacious for social distancing. We have also come up with a unique promo that you cannot get in the market, where each day, each Thursday, You know, we have the unique, the designer tuk-tuk that we have in the shops, the three-wheeler, that is our trademark. Now we are putting essentials every Thursday, and we run a very crazy, we are calling it a crazy promo, to ensure that we give back to the customers. Like today, if you walk to any of our shops, you buy a 10-pack tissue, you'll get an extra one for free. Last week, we were running another promo on washing soap, the bar soap. You buy one, get one free. So we also going out of our way to support our customers, because we understand that customers are facing challenges in terms of their disposable income. In terms of our expansion, yes, the crisis came when we were in the middle of an expansion, and we had to make a hard decision at some point and say, we've already committed for these projects. Why not open them? And they also help us, not only in terms of boosting our turnover numbers, but also in terms of helping us also achieve the social distancing that we want. We've seen some improvement in terms of the online market. We have partnered with Sandy to ensure that customers do not necessarily have to come to the shop if they don't need to, so that you can make your orders through the branch and then they are supplied to you without necessarily coming to the branch. But our strategy is working with our partners, and we've noted 4 key partners in this crisis. One of them is the customer, that we need to ensure that our customer is safe when coming to the store, when shopping, and even when leaving the store. And we ensure that we support the customer as much as possible. The other one is our staff. We have ensured that even the social distancing that we keep on emphasizing to our customers is also adhered to by our staff. We provide them with masks, we put hand sanitizers across our stores, and we continue to support them in terms of working hours. The staff who stay far, we have local arrangements that they can leave work early so that they get home safe.
So, Simon, has there been a big shift? And I suppose people, what's interesting is for us to understand is, has there been a big shift in sort of the SKUs that you were selling pre-crisis to what you're selling now? And I presume there's probably an increase in demand for things like maize meal, sugar, etc. And then the others, maybe for things like coffee, I suppose, would come down. And then how then do you support, how do you deal with that sort of, I suppose you've got the opposite demand crisis where you've got an increased demand for certain products. And then, how do you deal with the suppliers for those products that perhaps are not selling as much during this crisis? And how do you support them?
Okay, that's a good question, Woody. What we have realized, as I was saying, is that the demand has spiked in terms of the issues. So the beauty of us is that as a retailer, we don't have a central distribution. So we don't have a DC. So our purchases are demand-based. So we buy what customers need. That has helped a lot in terms of managing our working capital. But yes, you're right. What we've done is even some of the sections that have experienced low demand, what we are doing with the suppliers is there's something we call SOS, the share or shell. We try to help them run some promos. You'll be surprised to learn that, for example, some categories like appliances, after running some of these promos, we have also experienced some increased offtake. Yes, we are working closely with the suppliers to ensure that where the demand is depressed, we can run some promos, and also at the same time, we ensure that our shoppers do not lack the essentials that they really need. So that has been helpful. And mainly managing our inventories from a demand-based technique instead of storage and then you distribute. That has also been helpful.
That's interesting. I know, Paul, you might have a hard stop at 12, but I don't know if you're happy to carry on for another 5 or 10 minutes, or you need to leave.
I can do another 10 minutes. I'm really sorry, but because I thought it was going to last an hour, my diary's like zoomed out at the moment, as you can imagine.
We see this. This is the peril of having a very interesting panel. See, but it overextends. But what's interesting, I suppose, just coming back to, you know, the other big theme is just around, you know, everyone's sort of focused on, you know, cutting costs and thinking about, you know, just saving cash, which I think is right in its way. But, you know, as you emerge, and you use your expression, Paul, sort of planning for the future today, just in terms of, are you thinking about investing, for example, in technology? I know this is all about PPE and how do we sort of remodel our stores, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, technology is going to play a big part in this now, I suppose, is my first question. And the second question is, you know, given that you're essentially private equity owned and you've got a mandate to grow. Now this obviously changes dynamics, and, you know, how supportive are sort of, I suppose, your investors in this journey?
Yeah, first of all, the one thing, believe it or not, Java, when I joined, was operating on spreadsheets, and we've got PhDs in spreadsheets. I've never seen such advanced spreadsheets in my life. So we implemented an ERP system. It took a lot of time because, as you know, we had an issue when a barge had its problems that it had, so it caused a lot of complexities and issues. But we maintained that investment, and the only thing that we are investing at the moment is in the remaining side of that ERP and bringing things like loyalty in that you've just got to have these days. The issue with loyalty, as I said to my team, is loyalty comes from great service and food, and until we've got that absolutely right, I'm not giving anyone an app or a card. You know, that's the process by which loyalty is managed. It's not loyalty. So that's the first thing. The second thing on the investors, I mean, we moved immediately to board updates each week. Now that sounds mad, but again, in my experience, that's the best thing to do when you're in this situation. And as a result of that, the learning and the DNA movement between us and the board has been managed, and our investors brilliantly. They are now understanding things better. And as a result of that, they're massively supportive to the point that, you know, we've got a drawdown facility further if we need it. And a huge amount of support in where we are and how we operate and what we do. I mean, they could not have been better in terms of how they've managed it and how they've handled it. So it's been very positive.
And for you, Simon, I mean, you've got a parallel in that you've got also a private equity investor in your business, and you know, I'm conscious this is also an EAVCA panel, so you know, it'd be interesting to get your perspective on how, I suppose, the private equity partners that you've got, you know, how involved are they in your now day-to-day planning and assistance that they give, I presume, a fair amount, and I suppose for you. You know, how do you think about data analysis, thinking, and data-driven technology investment?
Okay, thank you very much. In terms of how we relate with the investors, one is to have regular communication in terms of where we are in this crisis, what we are doing, and also get to have continuous engagement, which we are doing regularly, in terms of how we are managing the situation, and they have been very helpful. We are lucky to have investors who have deep experience in terms of a blend of experience in terms of retail in developed countries and across the globe, and their assistance has been very helpful. So that has also helped us in terms of getting through the crisis and also managing the expectations in terms of the returns that are expected. So yes, they have been helpful in terms of data analytics. You know, retail has changed. I've seen one of the participants asking a question regarding the way we design our stores. It's informed by data. We have done a lot of data analysis, and we noted what is this that the customer needs. We are a neighborhood store, or we are a neighborhood retailer, in terms of we allow customers convenient shopping. You drive to our stores, you open where possible in an open space, no hassles. You're not parking in an underground basement parking. So it's very easy for you to just park, get into the store. You can easily find what you want and then get out. In terms of data analysis, it's the heart of retail. We need to know what is this that the customers want. You need to compare with the market. Is it available in the market? For example, we noted that right now, customers are doing pantry loading. Somebody doesn't want to make so many visits to the store. At the same time, people are very cautious about their spending because there is a depressed disposable income. So what we've done, for example, starting with Kilimani, we've come up with bulk shopping. So if for example, you buy something in bulk, you buy 12 packets of Vuka, for example, of maize flour, which is in a bale, the price is not as the same as if you are to buy 1 unit. So we are also bringing a semi-wholesale value proposition in our shops so that we can also help the customer who wants to pantry load, at the same time save on in terms of pricing. So yes, data is very helpful. In fact, without data, you cannot manage the current retail segment.
Thank you. And so, I mean, I suppose we just got a few more minutes to wrap up. I mean, Valentin, just from your perspective, in terms of production, and I think in the audience, we've got a whole bunch of people who have manufacturing businesses, etc. I mean, if you were to give them sort of your top 2 tips of what they need to be doing and thinking about, I mean, what would that be?
I think the top 2 tips would be elimination of waste, making sure the value stream mapping is done and all non-value add activities are done away with. And of course, ensuring that there's no obsolescence of product for those who have reduced sales. There's no obsolescence of product through just-in-time production, managing inventory, and definitely managing cost in terms of delaying anything that can be delayed in terms of Kpis, as you rightly said, or OPEX that can be delayed, or non-business critical costs. Yeah, and just focusing on business critical costs for now.
Right. Paul,
as well as, of course, us, sorry? For us, we also have some costs that we cannot delay. This is especially with regard to sustainability. We still have our greenhouse gas emissions and water usage targets for 2020, 2030, and those have not stopped. So in terms of sustainability, we are still on course. With any Kpis or any plans that have been made for sustainability, that is still on course, as we view that as business critical.
Okay, thank you. And Paul, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, we've got a lot from the conversation, but and it's obviously there are a lot more things to talk about because they're just different facets for you. But I think you know, given that you're a business that has a substantial sort of drop in top line, you still got the costs, and you still got a target to grow. I mean, what do I understand? The first key message is don't panic and just make sure that you've got to sort of get a new mindset change, that this is where you need to be now. But practically, I mean, for you, you've got to still chase top line turnover thing. I mean, what would be your, and the others in your position? I mean, what would be your advice, and how do you see the world post pandemic? What do you need to be doing now?
Well, I think, as I've said to you, that the immediate thing we did, as you alluded to, was that we cut all our costs out. So we stopped all investing straight away, except where it was absolutely critical. We dealt with sort of working with the landlords quickly. We got our age debt ledger sorted out quickly. We sent everybody on leave within the first week of April. We had a leave schedule on clearing all leave up. And even keep some salary balance, we advanced some leave to try and balance that out. We brought everybody's salaries down by the beginning of May, cut across the whole business from around 70–80% in my case down to sort of 40. All the other cost bases that we had, we just stopped immediately. So in fact, we reduced our cash flow, and the target was that if your rent is normally 8% of your sales in a business, the target was to get rent at 8% of the current sales. And in fact, we achieved that. In fact, we achieved better than that. We also looked at our COGS. We looked at the raw materials that we still had in the business that were now going to be not used up. How do we put those into recipes that we can move them on quickly? How do we reutilize them? We sent out 2,500 food parcels and packages for a month's basic supply to all of our staff, just to help them using some of those ingredients up. And we got our levels to where we need to. In the interim, all the things that I've told you about, the planning, we started groups working on them. So we've now developed a whole range of retail packages that we've got 3 supermarkets into. Because I think, you know, I spent 19 years in Marks and Spencer's as well, and one of the great things in these sorts of situations, they manage to cost well and the business is well, but forget to look at the change in the products that are now going to be required as a result of this. And I think there'll be a shift in people are going to eat in home more. They get fed up of doing take-in, so they want to do their own meals. So meal kits, recipe dishes, heat from frozen are all going to become more and more relevant in the future on that. So we're moving into that. And really just planning and keeping on planning. So there's a lot of negotiation going on with people in Ethiopia so that we can get all the deals streamlined but executed at the time. So we are still going to be a business that's growing. All of our stores are going to remain that we're growing. We still have the strategies of what we want. But we've done little things like Kpis, for example, which is our new chicken brand. We had 1 store, we had 8 in the pipeline to open by June this year. So those machines that we bought, we dropped into the really large stores where we could manage them, and we created a much bigger takeaway menu for that particular store that covers all aspects. So we've had to be very flexible in our thinking of what we're doing. But, you know, the main thing is getting people's heads around, look, you know, this is where we've been, but where are we going to be now? And if this is what we are, we had a day about a month and a half ago, right, here's the new future. This is what we're going to be now as a business. Now go away, everybody, and figure it out. Work out what it's going to mean to you and how you're going to change. And that's been amazing, the sort of input that everybody's had in. It's really, really good. You know, it's a time to think now. It's a time to think. It's something we rarely have the chance to do.
No, absolutely. So I think the key is change in mindset, focus on trying to cut costs where you can, but then also focus on thinking how the business is going to evolve, and it's not necessarily, in your case, a coffee store, right? It's a lot of other things, and I think that's the stuff that you need to think about. We're no longer a restaurant business. We are a food supply business, and that then opens up a huge amount of sort of connotations of what you can get into. Well, that's very powerful. And Simon, for you, I mean, I suppose a few last words for you. I mean, from a business that is, I suppose, generating cash, opening new stores. There's a question around sort of, you know, how do you sustain that? How do you make sure? Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, I need to go. I'm really sorry. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. Look forward to the next one if I'm invited again.
You will be. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
So Simon, last words from you. I mean, we'll end on a positive note. A business that is churning out cash. I mean, how do you see the world going forward? I mean, you stay on course, or do you also not sit back and relax, but also invest in thinking about how to change your business model? Or are you already doing that?
Okay, thank you. Good day. I think, as I had said, we are actually also affected in terms of the city clients that now we have to serve the takeaway. So that is a business that's a segment that is lagging behind. But essentially, if you look at the retail industry in Kenya, we are having, if you look at the growth, we grew by 6.6% last year in terms of the industry. Of course, it was higher than the GDP growth of 5.4%. The GDP growth this year is projected to decrease by at least 2%, at least by going by the CBK revised estimate. So we expect that the GDP will grow by 3.4%. So the impact is that the disposable incomes will go down So that means that, yes, we have the shops, but the shoppers do not have money. So what we are doing is looking for or coming up with strategies that support our shopper. As I was talking of the deep promos, ensuring that our shops are also safe and that the shopper is very safe when they visit our shops. But going forward, our target is how do we come up with products that what the customers need and are at the prices that the customers can afford. So that is our key area of focus. The other one is in terms of partnerships. We need to work closely with our partners, keywords being suppliers. You know, we are in Kenya, we have unfortunately an industry where a few suppliers or rather a few retailers have gone down with significant amounts of cash that belongs to suppliers. Nakumat went down with 18 billion.
Yeah.
Uchumi went down with 3 billion. We had Kpis going down with close to 1 billion. And there are rumors in the market that there's another one who might be struggling. So that is also something that we need to proactively manage. And we are proactively reaching out to our suppliers, assuring them that, yes, we are here for them, and we'll always honor our obligations as and when they fall due. And at the same time, there are those suppliers who have been with us for so long, but because of COVID, their businesses have been significantly affected. So we are also reaching out to our bankers and connecting the two and coming up with, for example, short-term financial arrangements such as invoice discounting. And we support the suppliers through this phase because we understand it's hard for everyone. So
Yeah.
that is where we are.
All right. Well, great. Thank you all. Thank you, Valentine, Simon. Thank you, EAVCA, of course, Paul. Thank you for the attendees. And clearly, if there's anything that you want to pick up and discuss further, please feel free to contact me directly or indeed with Eva at EAVCA.
Well, thank you so much, Ude, and a great job to the panelists. Thanks so much, Valentine. You are not part of PE portfolio companies, but we really couldn't have done it without your expertise as one of the leading manufacturers. So thank you so much. Simon, it's been a busy time for you with the expansion plans, and we really appreciate the time. To all that have stayed on for the 90 minutes, we really, really thank you. And on behalf of the EAVCA, we sincerely appreciate your attendance and engagement. This recording will be available on the EAVCA website, and the presentation by Ude will be shared to all the attending guests.